As you have seen, the amount of work that needs to be done is still enormous. My ministry alone cannot accomplish it. Neither can the Ministry of Justice and Consular Affairs accomplish it on its own. It's therefore my call upon all stakeholders to play your part of preventing violations of rights of the people, adhere to the laws established, and ensure the remedy is offered to persons injured in the process of undertaking business activities. With these remarks, I want now to take this opportunity once again to thank all of you for giving in your time to attend this symposium. I also thank all the organizers that have put in their financial and technical resources to enable the success of the dialogue. It's now my pleasure and singular honor to invite the chief guest, Honorable Nabot Mao, Minister of Justice and Consular Affairs, my brother, to deliver your keynote address. Thank you for listening, for God and my country. And I need to say, in Ateso we say, Yalamanoi. Ebo, Emuriakoliai.
Thank you, Honorable Asamo, my colleague. Let me stand on the established protocol. So I'll only say, dear friends. One of the beauties of being a minister is that there are so many people who are paid to advise you and make you look intelligent and sound educated and well-read. Therefore, the wonder of wonders is always, how can a minister make a stupid decision? When there are so many highly educated people who are ready to help you to be the most well-informed person in the ministry, and also the most effective decision maker. It's important that we celebrate that privilege as ministers. I'm sure that privilege also applies to ambassadors. I'm sure it applies to you, the CEOs of these organizations who have displayed all these paraphernalia. The only body with no paraphernalia is the government of Uganda. I have not even seen one for the Ministry of Gender, Labor, and Social Development. But in this case, I'm lucky to have the Uganda Human Rights Commission at least, under whose banner I will march today. I have a speech, actually. Believe it or not. Like I said, it's one of the beauties of being a minister that you will discuss with people who are arranging your participation at an event. Tell them a few things here and there. Then out of that, they'll craft a speech. I'm a very poor speech reader because that's not how I'm wired. I'm a non-linear thinker. So let me start by thanking all of you for gathering here to take a stand in favor of human rights in the arena of business. 3 days ago, I attended a function of young people, and then somebody said, 1 + 1 can be 2, but 1 + 1 can also be more than 2, provided there is synergy. So let's start by celebrating the synergy that we see here. So we expect that you are not going just to be the sum of the total of who you are, but you are going to be more than that because of synergy. I thought my airtime was over. So as your guest of honor, it's my privilege to join you in celebrating what we call synergy. I was very pleased to get this invitation from my sister, the Minister of Gender, Labor, and Social Development. And I recognize the partnership and the commitment that this dialogue is all about. This is the first time I'm participating in the annual Symposium on Business and Human Rights. So I congratulate you for reaching the 5th birthday. The Ministry of Health always publishes something about infant mortality. And infant mortality is defined as death before the age of 5. And the death is due to what they call the 6 killer diseases. I don't know whether there are still 6. There may be more. I remember diarrhea, whooping cough, diphtheria. You know the rest. So I should congratulate you for sustaining this conversation for 5 years. That means you are well vaccinated against the killer diseases responsible for infant mortality. The elaborate statement presented by my colleague, the Minister of State, shows that there's been a lot of progress in ensuring the protection of human rights in the context of business operations in Uganda. So please convey my appreciation to my colleague, the Minister, and the entire team, including Mr. Mujuni, and all the social development partners, diplomatic missions, funders who have supported your efforts. But the one point that I did not miss is that you have said that even though a lot has been done, there's still so much to be done. And that is where I start from, because what you are doing today is giving us our report card. Now, the report card does not look good. So if you were head teachers, you would say, more effort required. Actually, this theme is squarely within the ambit of the ministry which I lead. And we are talking about rule of law, good governance, due process, and the least common denominator of all this is access. As a lawyer, the law is basically about asserting rights and redressing wrongs. So even if you are not a lawyer, you just need to remember those two things. That the law is about asserting rights and redressing wrongs. That's what it is all about. I know you are part of a campaign. Now, when you are in a campaign, there's bound to be disagreements. So I hope today you will also renew your convictions to remain true believers in these things, so that what you are doing is not just about another project proposal, another funding cycle, another evaluation report, and so on and so on and so forth. You must also assess yourselves. For us, we accept our report card. Now, you will also receive yours. Many of you are civil society organizations. Now, in civil society, NGOs, funding agencies, you are dealing with power. I never get tired of telling people about the contours of power. Because for somebody to wrong you, they must have the capacity to wrong you. I don't think anybody without power can wrong you. And it really doesn't matter what's the kind of power. And power historically has moved, and I keep talking about it whenever I get a chance. We used to have kings and queens and barons and lords. Power was deposited in monarchies. And citizens had to confront these monarchies. In France, they cut off their heads because they thought that really if you disconnect the body from the head, probably people will start enjoying more rights. Sometimes those in power are out of touch with reality, and that's why that lady, Marie Antoinette, who I recently learned was actually not French, but Austrian. I'll be corrected by Europeans who are here. When citizens were demonstrating for lack of bread, she had the temerity to wonder why they don't eat cake. So I believe by inviting us here, you want us to reconnect with the daily struggles of people who are coping and being squeezed between businesses and governments. So the ordinary people are caught between what the young people on Twitter say, between a rock and a hard place. So I don't know which one is which, but they are both hard. Businesses that want to maximize profits, and governments that want to maximize revenue, because that revenue also gives them more power and the ability to perpetuate themselves. I think that should be the framework of our conversation. And that's why what you are doing here is about action to bring about changes in the way the state and businesses treat citizens. That's how I've understood this whole thing. From browsing through the documents. In my speech writer pretended that I should tell you that I have read and internalized. For sure, I have browsed. I have not internalized, but I can tell you I understand the problem you are trying to address. So, this is an accountability forum. That's basically what I'm saying. Like my colleague, the minister, I also like to feel good, so I will talk about some of the good things we have done. Because it is important, first and foremost, to believe that we have the capacity to solve the problem. For those of you who are Christians, the model of this attitude is the Lord's Prayer. You start by saying, "Our Father who art in heaven." You must acknowledge that that Father has the ability to solve your problems. "Hallowed be thy name." So whose name is being hallowed here? Because in your documents, you are referring to UN principles. Definitely the UN has a lot of capacity, But I think in this case, it is the state. I told you already that the monarchs were a disappointment. They are still existing in a weaker form. Then they were overthrown by the church and religious bodies. So the Pope became an emperor. That's why you ended up with something called the Holy Roman Catholic Empire. But even the church was not satisfactory. That's why a man called Martin Luther started a defiance campaign and tamed the power of that powerful church. And of course, other movements came in. Some of you don't know that Istanbul was headquarters of Christianity. That's where Constantinople was. But even those who succeeded the church, namely the state took over the power of the monarchies and the power of the churches and religious groupings. So a monster called the state was created. And even the state is being challenged by multinational corporations. So look at those four contours: monarchies, powerful religious organizations, the state, and now transnational corporations. Normally, I try to talk about the architecture of power also. So from castles to cathedrals and grand mosques to state houses and now to corporate headquarters of multinationals. So now the corporate headquarters of Google competes with the White House. You should see when Mr. Zuckerberg is appearing for a hearing in the US Congress. You would think he's a visiting monarch. So, the best message I can give you is that you are trying to build power to contend with power, because the only answer to power is power. And the beauty is that power exists in many forms. So, this is now citizens' power that you are trying to generate to confront the other power. Those powers are there, that of the state. In Uganda, you know the famous blue letters. Even me, I was appointed by a blue letter. I always hear whispers, I have a blue letter. I'm going to State House. This is from State House. I'm from the White House. Some even say, I'm from number 10. You get the message clearly that I'm from number 10. So, here is our self-assessment. You'll tell us yours. In 2020, the administration of the Judiciary Act was enacted so that the independence of the judiciary is guaranteed. Sometimes, of course, we are misunderstood by those who act as if there is no due process in Uganda. I think there is due process. It is slow, but it is there. Together with the mother ministry of this initiative, that's the Ministry of Gender, Labor, and Social Development, there is the Human Capital Development, Gender and Equity Mainstreaming Committee. That's another milestone which qualifies to be called progress. So the poor and marginalized groups, who we know have limited access to justice, can at least have their voices heard. I use the word voices heard deliberately, because sometimes there is what we call tokenism. You can have a chair, a seat at the table of decision making, but you don't have a voice. You are just like a piece of furniture. Sometimes you can have a voice, actually, but that voice is not heard. So we want the affected people to have a seat at the table of decision making, to have a voice, and to have that voice heard. That's how I understand what your campaign is all about. Because when I look around the room, I don't think there's any machine operator here. Is there somebody who operates a machine in a factory? Is there somebody who maybe is a truck driver who drives from Mombasa to Goma? I know you represent them. But those are the people we are talking about. They are the people whose hands get cut off in a factory, and then they are tossed around by Honorable Asamo's people. They go to Human Rights Commission. Human Rights Commission is an expert in writing letters. And the peasants faithfully move with the letters for year after year until So if this is the beginning of synergy, why don't you have like a clearing house so that Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development and Crispin's group and all these advocacy groups can have, maybe even if the meeting is only twice a year, to say these are the issues you are supposed to decide. There's somebody who came to me complaining that a labor officer in a local government even refused to return to him his letters. How can that happen in the Republic of Uganda? So either we get serious, or you won't see me in the 6th meeting. And I wanted to make a commitment, though we have been warned against swearing, but I would want to swear to be here every year. Because for me, of course, ministers are very busy people. They're always running here and there. I don't know where they go. But I've never attended a meeting where a minister is not very busy and about to rush to another engagement. Now, my style of management is different. I start my day by deciding what I'm not going to do. So I say, this I'm not not that it is not important, but I have decided that I'm not going to do it. So sometimes when people invite me for events, they get surprised that I sit there for hours and hours, and they say, what sort of minister is this? He doesn't seem to be busy. I like to be busy, but I also don't like to be busy being busy. Honorable Samo, you are free to leave. I'm not saying this to pin you down. But for me, I will listen to a speech at least. I'm going to sit and listen to 1 or 2 speeches so that I want to know people to hold accountable. Now that you have invited me in, you know, involving me in anything comes with risks. My record in that is clear. So I'm going to be here as a participant soon after opening this conference, because I am also equally frustrated when I see citizens with a file full of letters. I'll give you one simple example. A Ugandan got arrested in Turkey. He was tried. He was sentenced to jail 7 years ago. And he said, can't I go and serve my sentence in Uganda? The laws allow it. So his family came to see me. with about 18 letters from Human Rights Commission, from Ambassador of Uganda in Turkey, from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, from the Speaker of Parliament, from the local MP, and of course, State House, Legal Department. So I looked at the problem and I realized that this is a question of applying the law relating to exchange of prisoners. Now, I remember what I told you first, that a minister is very privileged. Even now, if I wanted to find out what the Constitution of Haiti says about the environment, I know who to call in the Ministry of Justice. I'll call and say, in 30 minutes, I want to know what the Constitution of Haiti says on environmental protection. They'll say, yes, sir. And in 30 minutes, indeed, they will tell me what they call. Now, that is the privilege we enjoy. And being in that privilege means we have a clearer view of issues. So either we have closed our eyes, or we are sleeping, or we have deliberately decided to look in the wrong direction. Because when you're a minister, you have been carried on the shoulders of citizens. You have the best view, but somebody is bearing your weight. You know, we operate at public expense. Yes, you buy the fuel, you buy our cars, you take care of us, and so on. So, what are we giving in return? I think that's really the question. I should at least be able to say, this is what I see and this is what needs to be done, because I'm probably sitting on 5 people and they have carried me in the hope that my being there is for their benefit. Therefore, aware of that, I summoned the Directorate of Legal Advisory Services. I said, does this law which we have in Uganda apply to Turkey? Said, no, sir. Okay, if you were the minister, what would you do? By the way, a lot of these ordinary people just fear to advise us because they think that a minister knows everything, a minister should give direction. These people in our ministries are like signposts. A signpost will point to the right direction, but it will never take you there. You'll get lost and still find it anyway. So, he told me, Honorable Minister, you need to sign an instrument to include the Republic of Turkey so that the law applies to it. But the people who came to see me had wanted me to do the very things that had failed for so many years. Honorable Minister, please write a letter to the Turkish embassy. And I said, you already have a file which is almost bursting with the letters, and nothing has happened. So I started by picking the phone. I called the Turkish embassy. You know, I'm a new minister, so my name is not associated with the government. I think in the mind of people, I'm still there where I was. I'm still in the bush. I don't know how long it will take for people to now accept that I'm actually in government also. So I spoke to the ambassador. The ambassador definitely did not register that this is the Minister of Justice. Maybe he thought this is somebody from the Ministry of Justice. The name did not click. So then he said, I will ask one of my officials to contact you. But I think later he had a chat with the secretary who put me through. He said, I'm sorry, Honorable Minister, I didn't know it was you. So I said, Your Excellency, I would really want to talk to you. He said, I will come to see you tomorrow. It was Thursday. And so by 7:30 he was there. he brought me a lot of sweets. You know, Turkey is known for sweets. And a big book with pictures of all the beautiful places the Minister of Justice should dream of visiting in future in Turkey. So I called the educated people in the ministry, and I said, let's now have a conversation. So I asked him, is it possible to do it? And he said, yes. So we drafted the instrument, we gazetted it, and I believe soon the young man will be on the plane to come back. And I have not written a single letter. So I always wonder why people have to walk in the corridors of government and they are not sure actually what the government is doing about their problem. Some even say, I have seen the minister. I've talked to the PS. I've talked to the commissioner. They promised to write. They said we are going to have a meeting. I'm sure if all of you who are gathered here are honest and sincere, you have your horror stories. Except that you are nice, decent people, don't like to scratch your whatever, your unmentionables in public. But it is your body which is itching. Anyway, I speak like this because I started my career as a lawyer for the poor. My first real job was that of project advocate in the legal aid project of Uganda Law Society. I had failed an interview to be a state attorney in the Ministry of Justice, which I now head. That's a true story. My uncle, Justice Ralph Ochan, was on the interviewing panel. And he told me, you did very well in interview, but your attitude did not impress the panel. How could you come and start lecturing us? You know, having been a student activist and so on, I didn't know that in interview you tell people what they want to hear. You don't answer the real questions. You must imagine, okay, you know, in the panel where these very conservative people like, you know, Mrs. Kadu, Engineer Zikusoka, these were really pillars of our conservative elite. So I went there with my activism and I think I just annoyed them. They said, surely we have better people. He has even been leading strikes in the university. So I guess it was a good thing. I never complained. I told Uncle Ralph, I said, you know, let me do something else. So I ended up with a private law firm. And then I did some research when Uganda Airlines crashed in Rome. We were fighting the insurance companies. It was a good experience. I went and lost an election for the Constituent Assembly. And then Uganda Law Society advertised the job for project advocate for Northern Uganda. The beauty of that is that there was nobody interested because there was a war in the north. So I think I've been the luckiest person because I was the only applicant for that one job. So the interview was beautiful. It was basically a counseling session. So Justice Salome Bosa was telling me, please don't be afraid of going to the north. We will support you. We know you can do a good job. We trust you, and we are going to give you the job. So instead of being interviewed, I was being counseled. But of course, Gulu is my home, so I was happy to go there. So in case you think I have just come here to perform a formality, these are things I believe in. I'm in it for the real reason. And in case you fear to quarrel, use me to quarrel. Particularly with that department or directorate of labor relations. Your next meeting should bring all the labor officers from every district together with the Ministry of Gender Labor, and you tell them whether they are doing a good job. You have seen workers in Wakiso fighting with their employers. Why should that happen? And the Human Rights Commission, which of course we underfund, does not have the capacity. They may not even have the fuel to go and talk to the people. So these are the recommendations I hope we shall receive. Okay. Let me go towards a close. For purposes of the courts, there's an inspectorate of courts. They are supposed to handle complaints. Now, in Uganda, complaining is not part of our culture. Now, assuming somebody from Arua comes to Commissioner Mujuni's office and is not attended to well, and somehow he or she reaches Minister Samo, Commissioner Mujuni will take that complaint as a personal affront. Why did you report me to the minister? Do you know I can frustrate your case? This is what goes on, and Ugandans are internally bleeding. Why can't we make complaining part of our culture? At least we in the courts of law, when a judge has dismissed your case, he says, you have the right of appeal, and even adds it, right of appeal explained to the plaintiff. Even in criminal cases, somebody say, I've sentenced you to death, but you have a right of appeal. Can we make complaining part of our culture? That is something that I have seen. So you think you are big because you know the minister. You have reported me to the minister. Let's see how your matter will be resolved. At least in the Ministry of Justice, I will not allow that. If anybody has that attitude, I can physically even prevent them from accessing their offices. I'll just leave a note at the reception and say, this person is not welcome. I have asked the PS first to investigate this matter. Citizens are suffering so much, yet we have the Republic of Uganda with the national anthem, with the flag, the national symbol. We have got the glorious UPDF projecting power all over Africa. So why should somebody who simply wants an abusive employer to be held to account have to go to that ministry for 2 years? In the Ministry of Justice, when it comes to legal interpretations, the Attorney General has committed that it is going to be 2 weeks maximum. If you want any interpretation, whether you like it or not, it will be there. And that's what we also want in the courts. For that reason, the first thing I did when I was appointed minister was to go and wake up a paper which had been sleeping in cabinet. And the Honorable Asama was very supportive. It was a paper to establish a cabinet standing committee on human rights. So about four months ago, the cabinet approved the establishment of the Cabinet Standing Committee on Human Rights. As you know, human rights in Uganda has become a hot topic. Everywhere, whether it is political leaders, opposition politicians complaining about their members being tortured, being abducted, we have got to come face to face with this because you cannot solve a problem until you face it. I've never seen any other way of solving a problem. That committee has very powerful ministers. The cabinet asked me to chair it. My deputy is the Minister of Internal Affairs. I'm surrounded by generals. Among the members are the Minister of Security, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Gender, Labor and Social Development, the Minister of Local Government, the Government Chief Whip, and the Secretary General of the ruling party sits in ex officio. Why? Because most of these human rights abuses are in the arena of struggle for power. Somebody has it, somebody wants it. So they clash in that process. What we have done was now to develop a final draft of the National Action Plan for Human Rights. You saw President Joe Biden and his AGOA people saying, we must have a National Action Plan on human rights. Please, Crispin and Uganda Human Rights Commission, I want to inform you officially that that work is already finished. We are not waiting for President Joe Biden to tell us. These Ugandans who are complaining are our citizens. They are not American citizens. Actually, each time they appear to be speaking for our citizens, it is an embarrassment. We should be the ones solving those problems. So we are going to circulate that National Action Plan to all of you so that you can make your comments in case there's something we have left out. But at least we have got a rough sketch. The other thing we did is to ensure that cases are moved fast. So the Ministry of Justice, we took a resolution to Parliament increasing the number of High Court judges from 83 to 151. So even if you have never seen a High Court judge, you are now going to see one. We are probably next week, going to table an amendment of the Judicature Act to increase the number of justices of the Court of Appeal from 15 to 56, to create very many appeal jurisdictions or circuits. We are not stopping there. You know, the Supreme Court has not been sitting because they're building court fire. So I don't know where they have been meeting, but the Chief Justice, fortunately, is working hard to improve infrastructure of the judiciary so that they stop being tenants also. So we are also increasing, under the same amendment of the Judicature Act, the number of justices of the Supreme Court from 11 to 21. Now, these last two courts sit in panels, unlike the High Court. So basically, in a situation where you have Supreme Court judges of advanced age, others may be sickly, you may simply fail to constitute a panel. In other words, you don't have quorum. So these are things that we are doing at the Ministry of Justice. The Attorney General has said clearly that he is not going to defend agents of government who abuse human rights. He's not going to be there. He has said it publicly. So we have a duty to respect, protect, and fulfill all the human rights in our Constitution. And we welcome your pressures on us. At the same time, we must build the capacity of the state. The Ugandan state is not still strong to the level that we desire. We are still in a state building project. We are like a vehicle trying to move, but on a road which doesn't exist. And as you know, vehicles must move at the speed of the road. You may have a Ferrari which can drive at 400 kilometers per hour, but I think when you visit Kampala, the roads will dictate your speed, not the car. So I also urge you to, in the words of Bob Marley, to check out the real situation in which we are operating. This is the Uganda. Because the moment you say this is the condition in which we are operating, then you will not commit suicide because of frustration. You will then know how to tackle it. The state is still not strong enough. That's I can tell you. I'm a minister of the government, and I can tell you that we need to enhance the state capacity. There are people who still have the ability to overpower the state. maybe not the real state, but those who are supposed to act on behalf of the state. Because if you have police officers who can be bribed, if you have labor inspection people who can be bribed, if you have tribunals that can be compromised, then you can't say the state is strong enough. But I want to say here unequivocally that businesses have a duty of compliance. And where they are not complying, please report. We have a duty to guarantee predictability of remedies. Some citizens don't know what to do. I have seen in Britain, there's something called citizens advice centers. I don't know whether you people can think about something like that. Most of the people who come to see me just want good advice. Sometimes I wonder whether I needed to be a minister to sit there and just to advise citizens. We need agencies that can offer good advice to citizens. Our citizens, the people they elect, I no capacity to advise them. For the simple reason that the leaders, after being elected, avoid the voters because they think the voters simply want money. So who is going to advise the citizens, even to know that you people exist? Then, all businesses, whether national or transnational, have to comply. There are those big-headed international companies that want to play by different rules. I want to tell you unequivocally, the law applies to you also. I know it sounds politically incorrect because some businesses have taken photos with the president of Uganda, so they think their rules are different from the rules of somebody who has not taken a photo with the president of Uganda. So if maybe you are from a big Chinese conglomerate, because probably your deal is in multi-billion and you're from the People's Republic and so on and so on, you are a big friend of Uganda. As far as I'm concerned, these laws apply to everybody. I confronted that issue when I was chairman of the local government of Gulu. One day I called a meeting of NGOs, and the international NGOs refused to come. That for them, they are another tribe. So I postponed the meeting, and I told them, either you come to the next meeting or get out of Gulu. In fact, one of them, I sent them away for some time until they repented. That was Médecins Sans Frontières. They had won a Nobel Prize, so their head was as big as the Mount Rwenzori. They were doing projects in IDP camps at a time when the government policy was that IDP camps should be closed. And when our chief administrative officer wrote to them saying, please, that's no longer allowed. You must now take the boreholes and other amenities to the villages where people are returning. Sorry, sir, we have already awarded the contract. So they came to Chairman Mao, and Chairman Mao read them the Right Act and said, for you, this is a project. For us, this is our home. And that is a big difference. You see? All these companies running around, for them, they can go anywhere. They can go to Sri Lanka tomorrow. They can go to Malaysia. They can go to South Africa. They can go to Kenya. But for us, this is our home. This is our only home. So those of you who are Ugandans who are here, you should know that all these international partners are like scaffoldings. Scaffolding helps you to build your house, but at the end it must go. Any scaffolding which stays forever is a sign that the house is not getting finished. It's like the iron sheets, around projects. Whenever you see iron sheets not being removed, the project is not going anywhere. So, you invited me, and I have to tell you. There was a crane on Communication House. You remember that crane? It was there for decades. Some people thought it was a sign that there's a lot of work going on. Of course, when the crane is there, it means no work is being finished. When the crane left, then the house was finished. So all these people who you say, these are our partners, these are our supporters, and this, they must support you, and then you fly. Imagine if you are pushing a car and you are pushing from here up to Jinja. What sort of car is that? It must start and propel itself without that additional energy. So, at least I have told you, you may not agree with me. Finally, we promise to ensure that we keep improving the policies, legislation, regulations, and above all, adjudication frameworks that will ensure that these rights are respected. This year we hosted the first ever Alternative Dispute Resolution Summit in Uganda because the courts are failing because of logistical problems, so we must look at alternative dispute resolution. So I am hoping that we start another conversation with you people who are here. How can we use alternative dispute resolution to enforce some of the rights that these workers have, employees, and also use ADR as an alternative remedy? I do believe strongly that it can augment what we call adjudication. Either way, looking around the room, I think you people have the capacity to deal with these problems. You are very highly educated. The lady from Africa Resources is indeed my OG. She became my OG because I was about to be discontinued. I should have graduated earlier, but then I got entangled in politics. I had enrolled for a master's degree in development studies at Uganda Matters University with a lot of excitement. Then I got distracted by politics. So the registrar was about to discontinue me. So I asked for a dead year, and that's how she caught up with me. But I want to assure you, I graduated. And I was very passionate about that course. And let me tell you the topic of my master's research. It was elite capture of community development projects. Yeah, which is the same problem we are facing with the Myoga, parish development model, whatever. Capture by elites. If I had more time, I would enroll for a PhD to pursue that subject even faster. Because we have got citizens who are being marginalized by those who are supposed to serve them. With those many words, most of them totally unrelated to the subject of your meeting, but I thought I should exercise the prerogative and the wide latitude that being called a guest of honor means to share with you from my heart, though I have this beautiful written speech which you can get and read at your own time. I wish to declare this conference officially open for God and my country.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Honorable Mao. You are the epitome of eloquence. Every time you get the honor of listening to him, don't just skim through, internalize what he has said. At this juncture, I know that many of us routinely would have allowed for us to have at least 2 or 3 reactions or comments from the room. But in the interest of time, because we are running short of it, we would like to run straight to the keynote speaker, and then after that we can have a round of reactions. Are we in agreement? Does that work for us? Thank you so much. The IT team? Is the sound on?
Hello. So as we get to the keynote speaker, dear friends, I would like to introduce to you Professor Damilola Olaui. He is a key figure in enhancing business and human rights at the global level. Professor Damilola is the chairperson of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, who is mandated by the Human Rights Council to promote the effective and comprehensive dissemination and implementation of the UNGPs globally. Professor Damilola is the chairperson of the UN Working Group, UNESCO Chair on Environmental Law and Sustainable Development at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Doha, Qatar. And we are therefore enlightened to have this professor share with us or enlighten us on how we can progress with a business and human rights agenda beyond the adoption of the National Action Plan. You're welcome, Professor. And in the interest of time, I'm requesting that we try to cut on the time a bit. So, Professor, I'm requesting that you use 10 minutes. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, Excellency, the Minister of State for Disability, representative of the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, chairperson and members of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to stand on existing protocol and say good morning to you on behalf of all of us in the United Nations Working Group on Business and Human Rights. As you may already know, our working group was established in 2011 to promote the dissemination and implementation of the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which, as many speakers have already described it, is the authoritative statement on what responsible states and businesses should do to promote human rights in economic sectors. Before I go on, I must start by congratulating the Resource Right Africa, Dan Church Aid, as well as the Uganda Human Rights Commission and all other partners for bringing us together to explore this important topic. I think one of the most difficult compliments that I get is when people tell me, we look up to you. It is difficult because I don't know whether to be happy that I'm being looked up to or whether to be sad that I'm under so much pressure. And so when next you meet me at a conference and you want to make me uncomfortable, you can say that. But I've been to many events recently. In September, we were at the African Forum, and people said publicly that we look up to Uganda, being one of the first few countries in Africa to have a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. We were in Tanzania just 2 weeks ago at the African the session of the African Commission, and people said the same. We were in Ghana at the NANRI conference, Network of African Human Rights Institutions, and people still said the same. We look up to Uganda. And just a few weeks ago, I was in New York at the UN General Assembly to present our report. And still, one of the people that intervened, I believe it was the speaker from the, one of the speakers, government speakers, said, we look up to Uganda to lead in the implementation. So I said, well, Uganda must be under pressure. When people look up to you, what do you do? Who do you look up to? I think when people look up to you, it only gives you, of course, it's worth celebrating that at least something is being done, but it also gives you pressure to continue to remain a positive role model, to continue to inspire, to continue to innovate, to continue to improve what you have in order to remain one of the best. And I think today's session provides us that important opportunity to reflect on progress made in Uganda and the opportunities to remain at the forefront. And I was really, really excited when I listened to the Minister of Justice talking about the scorecard, because I had actually titled my keynote as Uganda's scorecard. And so it was very, very inspiring to hear some of those innovative and from the art positions made by the Honorable Minister. So in a few minutes, I will just share what I think can be that way that Uganda will remain at the forefront as that country that Africans are looking up to continue to stir progress in this important area. Of course, I will provide some information about the guiding principles on business and human rights, as well as what our working group is doing to implement it. The guiding principles, as I mentioned, provides the authoritative statements on how states can advance the business and human rights agenda. It was put together as a milestone to address some of the complaints and challenges we've seen over the years in which many of Africa's wealth leave the continent, leaving local communities poorer than they were before those resources were found. And this is not a challenge for Africa alone. We've seen in many parts of the world, in Asia, in Latin America, and in other parts of the world in which local communities suffer from irresponsible business conduct, from corporations doing abroad what they may not be able to do in their own countries, pollution and the likes. And so the guiding principles is meant to cast a spotlight on businesses. Before now, human rights used to be understood in the context of what states can do. But since 2011, we are now focusing a lot on what businesses can do as well. And as a working group in executing our mandate, we organize a number of events and activities to create awareness. We have our thematic reports that provide information on a wide range of topics. And some of the topics we've addressed in the past is how states can introduce a gender dimension into the business and human rights dialogue. And all of these reports are available online. And the report I presented 2 weeks ago at the UN General Assembly is our latest report on extractive sector, just transition and human rights. Uganda is blessed with mineral resources, cobalt, gold, and the likes. And now with the energy transition, there is increased concern that there might be a new wave of resource curse if we don't integrate human rights into the search for minerals. So, and that report looks at what states can do and what business enterprises can do to ensure that the increased demand for solid minerals due to the energy transition does not then lead to greater harm to local communities. So I would recommend that we read that report if you have not already seen it. It's a very, very timely and important one. In addition to reports, we also have our communication procedure that allows anyone from anywhere to submit communications on alleged human rights violation by any business to us. Our key concern is that despite the rise in awareness on the UNGPs, allegations of human rights violations by oil companies and other companies in other key sectors, especially violations relating to contamination of ancestral lands and land grabs and the like, still remain. And so this communication procedure allows people to bring that to our attention, and we normally issue statements condemning such actions when we receive them. Again, I welcome civil society actors to familiarize themselves. Normally, when we consider this report, it's always surprising to me that we receive only very few from Africa, which is not that there are no complaints, it's just that the awareness of the procedure may not be there. So I'm talking about, in addition to that, we have our country visits, which allows us to go on the sites in countries to see what is happening. And we've had a number. We've had 18 so far. We're in Liberia just last year. We've been to Kenya, Ghana, and next year we will be in Tunisia on our country visit. We hope to be in Uganda sometime in the near future as well. And of course, our annual Business and Human Rights Forum is another key activity. We are preparing for it towards the end of this year, 27 to 29. If you are not already planning to be with us in Geneva, please join us. We look forward to welcoming you. And of course, those that cannot attend, they can join us online. There's going to be a session on Africa talking about, land issues and how we can address issues of land grabs in development activities. So these activities of the working group are meant to reinforce some of the key pillars of the guiding principles. The guiding principles is essentially about, what I describe as the panel principles, P for participation, ensuring that all stakeholders that might be impacted by development activity have the opportunity to take part in and influence decision-making, ensuring accountability, reducing the tendency for illicit financial flows and the theft of natural resources, the lack of transparency, corruption in many parts of the continent, which rob us of the resources that could have been used to develop our communities and societies. So the guiding principles emphasizes the need for accountability both by states and accountability by businesses themselves. Of course, non-discrimination and equality, ensuring that vulnerable groups, particularly women and youth, have equal opportunities to participate in decision-making, ensuring that we create a level playing field, for women to play key roles as key stakeholders in all economic sectors. Of course, there is the issue of empowerment and access to information as well. We see increased concern. Some of the things we highlighted in our latest report include concerns relating to greenwashing, in which companies, especially oil companies, will say, oh, we have done A, B, C, and D to advance net zero and all of that. But again, we find out that some of those statements may be untrue. So we call for accessible reports that are truthful, that are accurate, that are timely, recent, and in languages that could be understood. One key challenge is to ensure that the reports are in languages that could be understood by different stakeholders. And in our travels, we see that the awareness on business and human rights is increasing, but most times it is increasing only in the capital city. When you go to Kampala, a lot of people know about business and human rights, but if you just go towards, outside of Kampala, then they may not even know there is any document called the UNGPs or the National Action Plan. So that, again, is one area that we are highlighting the need to ensure that we don't monopolize the human rights language and keep it just in the capital city. And of course, the last part is the legality and access to justice, which is the focus of this year's symposium, ensuring that these documents that we have indeed translate to remedies on the ground. And I love when the minister mentioned that the whole purpose of law is asserting rights and redressing wrongs. When there is a wrong, there must be a remedy. Law becomes useless when there is a wrong and there is no remedy. So ensuring that some of these emerging norms translate to effective remedy is what is key. And our forum this year in Geneva will look at that effective change and effective remedy, ensuring the norms translate to effective remedy. And as I mentioned, as I was preparing to speak today, I then, decided, being that my background is that I'm a professor of law, I thought, well, let me do a scorecard and see where we stand generally in the continent to see, in translating some of these norms to effective remedy. And in doing that scorecard, I looked at what constitutes real progress. And this document, our roadmap for the next decade, is a document that we developed as a working group when the UNGP celebrated 10 years of existence. So we asked ourselves, are we really making progress, or are we just speaking to ourselves? What indeed constitutes real change or real progress in any society and in any context with respect to the UNGPs? Number one is the need for clarity. Having a national action plan itself is not a silver bullet. It has to then translate to real implementation. And that's why, we have 3 countries in Africa national action plans: Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria. But then I ask, why is it then that some projects can still be implemented without meeting the threshold of the UNGPs? This shows there is a need for clear legislation to ensure alignment between the National Action Plan and the process for approving such projects, such that projects that do not align with the National Action Plan and the UNGPs will not be approved in the first place. That clarity is essential for effective change to effectively deliver access to remedy. Coherence is also important. There is a need to ensure that this National Action Plan and those important precepts that I've mentioned earlier on are integrated in all aspects of the economy, including in energy transition plans. The focus should not be on one area, leaving others. It should be integrated, whether we are talking about agriculture or extractive sector, whether we are talking about construction, whether we are talking about even activities relating to access to education, access to energy. There has to be a human right perspective in all of that. And that includes ensuring that we ask that key question: has there been a human right due diligence conducted for this project to be approved? We are all aware of the need for environmental impact assessment, which is something that almost all African countries have been practicing for years. But now we are calling for human right due diligence, which is you're not just only looking at the environmental impact, you're also looking at the likelihood of a project or decision to impact human rights. Then we are talking of the need for multi-stakeholder partnership and coordination. And today's event is the classic example of what we have been looking for. We have Resource Rights Africa, we have Down Church Aid, we have, UNDP, many other partners from the European Union, civil society coming together to talk about access to remedy. This is a key step in the right direction, and we want that to be sustained. All key stakeholders being involved in formulating that process of effective change: academia, business enterprises, government agencies. No one stakeholder is more important than the other, and no one stakeholder is the righteous and the other the villain. All of us have a common agenda and a common purpose to ensure that we live a society and community that is better for the next generation. A society whereby human rights is placed at the decision table, at the heart of every decision making. A society whereby we do not sit back and allow business enterprises to place profit ahead of people. A society whereby human rights becomes a core aspect of the rules of the game, rather than an afterthought. So we all have a common purpose to come together and continue to talk about these activities and the steps to achieve that ambition. Of course, one key step is to plug gaps in information sharing. There is a need for businesses themselves to provide verifiable and reliable information on their activities, accurate reporting on how each of the pillars of the UNGPs is being implemented in their business activities. The tendency of some businesses to just release robust statements that do not actually mean anything is something that has to be addressed. Whether we're talking about providing clear information on the website, providing clear and accessible information that is accurate, that is something that we have to. And I think even every government entity or agency should also have some information on business and human rights, the expectation that they have in their own ministry on what businesses should do when it comes to human rights. I think having that clarity on each government website or each government ministry is very key, so that businesses can know, especially, specifically what is expected of them. And I always say that funding is also important. The first true test of how much a country really cares about the business and human rights agenda is how much money government is willing to put for the Human Rights Commission to drive implementation. In many countries, in my travels, we've seen the same concern, the same complaint. Oh, we really understand the business and human rights language, but we don't have budget, we don't have money for this. So there is a need for sustained funding for business and human rights programs. There is a need for the international community as well, and this is something we also discuss within the UN regularly, the need for much more support and funding for programs that are aimed at creating awareness on the UNGPs. So taking all of this into account, then I as a professor, I said, okay, where do we stand in each of these points? regulatory clarity. Where do we stand? I think on that one, I would probably say maybe, a B, generally on the continent, because there is awareness. We have regional and country level events that are increasing, including the one we are doing today. We also saw that the African Commission has passed a resolution on business and human rights, which calls on all African states to finalize that regional framework. Even the African Development Bank has introduced clear language on business and human rights in its integrated safeguard system document, saying that, well, for any project to be funded by the bank, it must meet the UNGP's threshold. So, of course, the progress made in terms of having at least 3 countries, including Uganda, with a national action plan, this shows that there is indeed increased awareness. However, like I mentioned, legislative implementation and access to effective remedies remains quite weak across the continent. It's one thing to have those national action plans and documents. It's another thing to start seeing that it is now increasingly difficult for businesses to continue as in business and usual manner. So we need to block some of the gaps that I've mentioned, especially lack of clarity, lack of mandatory legislation. We know that the National Action Plan is not a binding document in many countries. So there is a need for that binding document, binding legislation that will integrate the National Action Plan and translate it into a framework for approving development projects. In terms of coherence, we see in many parts of Africa the weak integration of business and human rights in key economic sectors. So while there is a national action plan or there is awareness, that integration remains weak, and we see many projects and activities still going on in the business and usual manner. We see a weak capacity at local government levels to even understand and implement. Like I mentioned, the business and human rights language should not only be in the capital, it should be understood at the local government level. There should be a penetration of the business and human rights language at the local level. There should even be a local, business and human rights desk at the local level as well, in which they understand these issues and they create awareness to those there. Of course, the big elephant in the room will be issues of endemic corruption and illicit financial flows, which remains problematic across the continent. A recent report of UNCTAD showing that $88.6 billion, which is equivalent to 3.7% of the continent's GDP, remains, stolen and leaves the continent. There cannot be progress on business and human rights if we don't block some of these loopholes. And we must also avoid signs of human rights backsliding, even in some countries that already have national action plans. One point I like to make on this is that we cannot fight injustice with unjust methods. We cannot fight injustice in an unjust manner. So even as stakeholders in the business and human rights agenda, we must ensure that any aspect of social exclusion, any tendency to exclude some people or not to recognize the rights of some people is a violation of human rights. And we cannot say we are fighting human rights in an unjust method. So social inclusion, respecting and realizing and protecting and fulfilling the right of all stakeholders. Human rights is right that belongs to us because we are humans. So every human has a human right. So we should ensure that we have an inclusive approach to the implementation of the guiding principles, which of course goes into the issue of avoiding piecemeal and sectoral approaches, ensuring that some of the risk faced by human rights and environmental defenders can be addressed. We have to provide an opportunity for environmental and human rights defenders to play their important role in advancing the business and human rights agenda. And of course, in terms of information sharing, I've mentioned that lack of equipment for ministry officials to do their job, it remains a key challenge. Issues of training and capacity are still rampant. There is a need to increase capacity in this regard. There is a need to also promote sensitization, community engagement, and awareness at different levels. And of course, lastly is the point about funding, ensuring that we have increased funding and financial resources for key stakeholders to perform their important task. Well, it is, the future, to conclude, the future is about increasing our effort. If to go back to my introductory statement, when people look up to you, and there is a saying in Nigeria, where I'm from, that when people are looking at you, then you must not be distracted. When people are looking at you, you must not be distracted looking at other things, which means when all eyes are on you, then you have to focus on improving, on inspiring, on being a positive role model for the next generation. And I think Uganda is at a critical point in which, given the strategic role of Uganda in East Africa and in Africa generally, we are all looking up to Uganda to provide that inspiration to accelerate progress through process change and product change. And by process change, I mean making human rights due diligence and impact assessment a precondition for the approval of projects in many economic sectors, ensuring that we have boards, both state and business enterprises, having boards that have ESG and human rights competence. They will be able to make this call on when a project may affect human rights, providing human rights training for field officers, for ministry officials, for stakeholders. Also ensuring that all contracts, procurement practices align with human rights, including strengthening the use of alternative dispute resolution for non-commercial disputes, so that access to remedy can be accelerated. In most cases, going to court may be problematic, it may be time-consuming, and that's why we're increasingly calling for us to modify existing laws on alternative dispute resolution, so that they don't focus only on commercial sector, so that we can use arbitration, mediation, conciliation to resolve even human rights challenges, even human rights issues. When someone says my land has been taken, land grab, they don't have to go to court. We can use ADR to resolve some of this. And so that will require legislative change. And that's some of the legislative change that I was talking about, to ensure that we actually translate the National Action Plan to reality in widening access to remedy. Of course, product change is also important on behalf of business enterprises, upgrading their product and services and procurement standards to ensure that those services, those products comply indeed with human rights. And there is a need, like I mentioned, to promote homegrown solutions. And of course, looking at the room today, I'm excited by the wide range of stakeholders involved in this important symposium. And I'm confident that we will be able to advance and accelerate the effective implementation of the National Action Plan. And as a working group, and as the chairperson of our working group, I can assure you that we remain at your disposal to support the process through capacity development assistance. If you need any resource from us in terms of awareness or sustained dialogue, we are always ready to work with all stakeholders. I will end again by congratulating the organizers, especially Resource Right Africa, Dan Church Aid, and the government of Uganda for their dedication to capacity development in this important area. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor, for those words. And I want to believe that for people who are in this room, and especially if you are wondering, since morning we're talking about UNGP's National Action Plan, I'm sure now it is starting to shape up from what Chairperson was telling us and what they are doing as the UN Working Group, and especially emphasizes, legislative change towards, process changing to ensure that at least we move from just paper to action. We now need action, and that is why, as we said earlier from the different speakers, that now is a challenge for us, especially as Uganda, and as Professor mentioned, that we are already motivating, inspiring others, so we cannot afford now to backslide on that. So, dear participants or dear friends, as our chief guest set the standard on protocol, dear friends, we have a challenge now. The challenge is on our hands. How do we ensure that we stay at the top? How do we ensure that we stay the leader in implementation or in ensuring that businesses respect people's rights, but also respect the environment. How do we ensure that the different stakeholders play their parts on level ground? At this moment, I will ask you to first hold your questions. We are not going into the questions right now, but I would like, because this was setting the stage, I would like to invite another speaker, a presenter at that, who I've worked with as Resource Rights Africa and the Ministry of Gender in assessing the status of business and human rights in Uganda. It is after that presentation that we shall have questions or comments to the keynote speech and the presentation as well. So before I invite our presenter, I would like to recognize the presence of the Managing Director, ECOP, Martin Tiffen, the Deputy Managing Director, JB Bainomjisha. We have the Oxfam Head of Programs, Edward Mwebaze, sorry. Yes, we also have Honorable Shifra Lukwago from the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Like I said, yes, we are all key people right here in this room. And also, I would like to acknowledge our online participants who have been with us since morning. And for the other moderators, session moderators, please let us not forget that group online. But at this moment, I would like to introduce to you, dear members, and invite our presenter for a study on the status of business and human rights in Uganda, which is setting really the pace for our discussions here today. So I would like to invite Dr. Howard Ayo, who is an expert in business and human rights. He holds a PhD from Ulster University in Northern Ireland, where he developed a unique research-led framework for business and human rights national action plans for sub-Saharan Africa. So his primary research interests really lie in business and human rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, corporate social responsibility, and governance and sustainable development. So as we head into this presentation, I'm imploring Professor Damilola to first keep around for about 10 minutes to listen to this presentation, and also, as later the discussions and possibly any questions that may arise. Thank you. Howard, over to you. And if you can use 7 minutes, that will even be better.
Thank you very much, Frida. Our chief guest, Honorable Norbert Mao, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Howard Ayo. I recently just concluded my PhD research in business and human rights with a focus in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. I went to study the National Action Plans for Business and Human Rights. That was in 2018, when I got a scholarship by the government of the UK. I spent there about 6 years studying this specific framework. Resource Rights Africa contracted me not so long ago, about 3-4 weeks ago, to look at the state of business and human rights in Uganda. And I pointed to them that we cannot go outside the domain of the state because Uganda is a role model in coming up with a measure for business and human rights. So we are picking up on the National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights for Uganda. Before I dive straight into my presentation, I want to acknowledge Honorable Norbert Mao. He may not recognize me very much, but I'll give him 2 instances where I met him in person when he was on the other side. The first one was in 2020. The first one was in 2011. If you recall the walk to work movement, I met him in Gulu, walking from his home, going to the market, but he was stopped. By that time, I was working with the United Nations Human Rights Office, and I was doing my routine human rights monitoring work. The second time I met him, he was encountered with today's topic, and that is business and human rights. That was 2018 in July. I met him in Gulu when the community of APA invaded the UN Human Rights Office, Honorable Mao. And you are among the lead team in discussing with the government, trying to resolve the ongoing forced evictions that were happening in APA, which appears to be a buffer zone. They don't know where exactly they fall, whether in Amoro or in a Jumani district. And this is the third time we are meeting Honorable Mao on a good note, where we are talking of business and human rights. And I'm so happy that you made the statement that the government is now having a national human rights action plan for business and human rights. This was a voluntary commitment by the government of Uganda in 2011 when they went through a review by the human rights, the Universal Periodic Human Rights, Universal Periodic Review Mechanism by the Human Rights Council. So when they talk about state commitment to human rights, this is one of the commitments that the state voluntarily made, and I'm happy that it is coming. So going back to the presentation, which I will try to shorten, if you go back to the theme, somebody with a slide, please go back to the theme. We will be looking at a very unique theme, that is align the wheels, the state of national action plan on business and human rights. Why did I pick the concept of aligning wheels? Simply, if you are a driver, you always go to make sure that you check if your car is in a state worthy of putting it in the road. We are looking at the National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights, which was adopted, in 2021. But we do not know how far we are going. Are we on a smooth road, or do we need to go and align some of the wheels so that we have a safe journey in the next 5-year cycle? Next slide, please. The next one. I will start with some of the recommendations that are coming from the short study which I did on the Uganda's National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. Then I will go into how did we arrive here. The first one, and Honorable Mao, I would like to address this to your attention, is that the 1995 Constitution of Uganda is not well aligned to the current discussion of business and human rights. We are looking at distinction between two entities, natural persons and legal persons. But in the Constitution, we are having issues that they have married, or they have merged the two concepts to mean the same. And I will quickly discuss this at some point in time, that we need clarity, Honorable Mao. What does it mean when it comes to rights and duties for business enterprises as a distinct entity? Then you go about to look at the rights and responsibilities of other stakeholders. Does the Bill of Rights apply to legal persons, which in the Constitution we have grouped them as natural persons, the same way it applies to me and you as an individual? The same challenge also arises when it comes to the scope of business and human rights for companies under the Companies Act and the Investment Code Act. By show of hands, maybe I can drive this home. How many of you have participated in incorporating a company in this country? By show of hands, almost everybody. The next question I will ask you, was it a requirement that you should showcase or prove your commitment to human rights as one of the mandatory requirements for incorporation? That is the difficulty I am trying to talk about, which was not pointed out under the National Action Plan. Maybe the Investment Code Act, I might have not read it clearly. Is it a requirement that you should showcase? No, it's not. The other one, Right Honorable, Honorable Mao, is the National Environmental Act. The National Environment Act and the Land Act. Is that it is not a requirement that you should do human rights due diligence. There is a concept of due diligence which is required, which remains a very big abstract when it comes to these two pieces of legislation. What do they mean by due diligence within the framework of human rights? This is what we are talking about, that there is need to align these pieces of legislation so that they cohere with the current context of business and human rights. Next slide, please. The next recommendation, and why I am saying that we should align the National Action Plan to point out directly what do we want action to be taken. Because in the current state, the National Action Plan is very broad, and it doesn't give a clear direction on what should we do in the next 5 years in specific terms. Goes to stakeholders, and stakeholders does not exclude the civil society, and Honorable Mao talked about them. Strengthen participation and inclusion by corporations, especially multinational enterprises and privately, or those businesses which are registered within the country, their participation under the National Action Plan. In the current state, and evidence from the research that I was doing shows lack of participation by multinational business entities. They are a completely different creation, Honorable Mao. They're in a league of their own. You know, when you go into a bilateral investment arrangement with these foreign companies, you are creating a superficial framework that governs them completely outside the domestic legal order. And that needs to be discussed, Honorable Mao, so that we know for sure that to what extent do our domestic jurisdiction go far enough to look at issues of business and human rights by multinational business enterprise and those other enterprises. So strengthening their participation under the current National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights is very important. They are not distinct from our work in business and human rights. The other recommendation is that corporations should adopt internal measures for monitoring, reporting on human rights impact. Now, what we found on the ground is that because at incorporation they are not under duty or they are not duty bound to implement human rights, and so they are not also bound to put in measures. And this is the lacuna we have in the law, that it's being avoided by business enterprises. Can we make it mandatory for business enterprises to know that they are not distinct beings when it comes to human rights duties? So we need to correct here. The Human Rights Act, the Companies Act for the UK is very clear, as an example, that companies are under obligation to provide as part of their non-financial reports, human rights report, with which their operations are directly involved. But in our state, it is not a requirement by business enterprises to showcase their contribution to human rights. It can be positive or negative. So we need to strengthen in this area. Then enhance awareness raising in business and human rights for stakeholders. Attention should be paid to grassroots levels, namely districts, cities, and at village levels. This one has already been mentioned, but we have an issue with devolution, Honorable Mao, and all the distinguished guests who are here. Do they understand what business and human rights is about and is not about? When we talk about district local governments or city governments, or the devolution at the lowest level, and that is the village level. we have a missing link here, and that is where the numbers are when you are talking about, business and human rights. So attention should be paid there. Then enhance awareness raising in business and human rights. Increase resource allocation, which they have already talked about. Next slide, please. These are the recommendations. So this research went out to look at 3 areas. Number 1, to pick out key elements for the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the UN National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. How many of you have engaged with the Uganda's National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights? By show of hands, less than 10%. And this is where the difficulty starts from. You have to engage with this document, policy framework, for you to effectively contribute in terms of realizing the policy framework. We found that the participation of other stakeholders are inconsequential in determining the outcome of the National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. And who are these other stakeholders? I'm talking of civil society, and I'm also talking of the devolved system of governments, and that is the local, the spaces which are provided at the district or local government levels. So we need to have clarity. We need to engage with these documents. The second one is we are looking at participation and inclusion by stakeholders in the National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. Participation is not about you coming for a symposium like this and sitting and listening to us and going home. Participation is about informing the content of what is going to be discussed. Participation is about challenging the narratives which are going to come out from such kind of content. Participation is about, engaging in processes and programs and decision-making processes by the state and all other stakeholders that are directly engaged. And inclusion is about diversity. I'm making sure that, you bring different forces together, or different stakeholders together, so that their views are not left. I know I'm being warned on time. I am about to finish. The third element is looking at the recommendations which I've already done. So this was the scope of the research. Next, please, and I'll quickly summarize here. This is the context for business and human rights for Uganda. Population of 48 million people, and our current GDP is about $46 billion. And this is where business and human rights is contributing, making sure that GDP goes up, and if it goes up, strengthening per capita income. That is the average amount of money that is a take-home for people who are in the productive labor, in the productive age of labor. For that is about 14 to 60 years of age. Poverty, the measurement criteria has gone up, and that's why you are seeing about 42.2%. That is when it is measured by $2.15 a day. Honorable, and this is the last on this slide, I want you to have a look at unemployment figures. This data is picked from the labor survey report, the recent one by UBOS. About 12% of those in the productive age category, that's about 1.5 to 2 million, because the total labor force we have between the age of 14 to about 60, we are between 18 million to 23 million. But they are saying, the report is saying that unemployment, those who are not employed in that category, are about 1.5 million. And these are the issues that we are talking about when it comes to business, doing business responsibly. Okay, next slide, please. We need to be working on, using the action plan to address some of those gaps that the state is confronted. On the part of the state, it is very important to know that the finding, one of the issues which was very significant with the findings from this research is that there is a political commitment to business and human rights by the state. But this commitment is not being used to the advantage of the different stakeholders that are engaged in business and human rights. Secondly, there is arbitrariness in the National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights, which I've already mentioned in the recommendation, and I will not emphasize here. The same And this is where I again draw your attention, Honorable Minister. Article